it to the,
Okay, we are
If we
on.
get that far. Okay, so, roll call?
We're here.
we have a quorum anyway.
Okay. Do we?
Yeah,
Three.
3 out of 4.
Oh, I thought we needed 4. So, Kevin Coleman, Kathleen Flaherty, and J.B. Schutz, all in attendance. And, actually, the minutes just had to do with, Mr. Prissy's presentation. So, without any further ado, I don't think we really had minutes to approve, did we?
And then just make sure that we pull our mics close to be sure that Diane, because Diane's not here and I think she normally would be able to, take the notes. So let's just try to make sure that we're clear so she can take you some good minutes.
Right. Okay, we do have minutes.
Mhm.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Yeah, it was just a review, wasn't it?
Yes.
I'll make a motion to approve the
Right.
minutes.
Yep,
Second?
second.
All right, so moved. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay, I guess we are ready.
Do you know, in the minutes,
Pardon?
in the minutes, there's something about me tabling our agenda?
Can you just refresh me, who's absent?
Kendra Sutton.
Well, we kinda already approved it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just looking to see.
But it says in this agenda that items are tabled from the previous meeting, so.
Yeah,
Oh, there it is, I'm trying to find it, there we go.
okay.
All right, I'm assuming all public posting requirements were met. We approved it, so old business, Mr. Prissy.
All right. It looked like just us at the party today, huh? Bill Prizey with Land Architects for the record. As I promised, I would only take an hour today. I know I ate up the entire meeting last time.
It was a good
And-
hour, though.
And I think April had the opportunity to print you guys out the outline agenda for the first task there. And we got pretty much all through that, and it was about a third of the way through the photo presentation. And then I'll just come back to that to conclude with some of the things that we had talked about in that process as well. And I believe you guys have this right up in front of you, right?
Yep.
These up in front of you.
Jerry doesn't. I don't think your monitor's on, Jerry.
No, it's-
Yeah, it's coming now.
Did you see it? Oh, there we go.
And you guys can stop me at any time. I'm gonna roll through pretty quickly on this, just to try to get things done and through today. So we can jump into the context of this.
Sure.
Just to kinda sum up again where we were, I went through the outline, where we were, what the master plan is, what the context of task one was gonna be. And now coming through, this is pretty much is the photo inventory and analysis as well. And then coming out of this, I'm looking to get direction from you guys so we can finalize that task. And then I would present that information to April and her team before we came back to you guys next month. And I believe we got pretty much through Gateway all the way up until the lake, I believe. You guys don't wanna revisit the stuff we've already been through, do you? So kinda looking at, we talked about the understory with the oaks, the signature through here, some of the plants that were and weren't working in the understory. Issues like here where you've got, a commercial application on your public road, there should be, a buffer there. And, that's something that, through this process, we ought to look into where some of these commercial businesses aren't maintaining the buffers that they're supposed to be doing in their permit drawings. That's something we ought to focus on to get them to commit to participating in improving this process as well. And here's a pretty good indication of one, especially when you can see the back of the dumpster right from Gateway Boulevard. Coming down to the roadway again, as we know, a lot of the plants that give you color very well, especially in the second stage environments like this where we have mature oak trees, are plants like variegated shell ginger and the arboricola that we know that do work well, but I think residents get tired of looking at that, even though those plants really do work well. And I think the solution to that often is just to use them in lesser quantity and put them in more in visible spots where you get the sense of an accent and they're not overused as much. Sometimes you lose the sense of color if you overuse color in your landscape. And there's some indications of it. Again, end cap situations are in Gateway are pretty much pretty consistent through, where the cabbage palm is kind of the end cap statement as you come into before it transitions back into the oaks. And again, the signature statement of coming through Gateway is this, and at all costs, I think we want to play off of this, maintain this, use this, and continue to use this as a signature throughout Gateway. And this is the reverse angle end cap coming into Commerce Lakes. And Commerce Lakes is probably, of all the main intersections on Gateway, in my opinion, is kind of the weakest in terms of its visual appeal. You kind of lose a sense of it when you come up through that intersection on Gateway Boulevard. I think that could be improved somewhat by the treatments right on the corners and how you transition back into Gateway Boulevard from there. It just has a bit of a weak feel to it. And this is kind of an indication of it here, where you've got some of the areas where the commercial projects come right up onto Gateway Boulevard that could use a little more help. Kind of a standalone statement there from an oak tree that got left remaining from when some of the turn lane improvements came in and took some of the other oak trees out. Again, some of the end cap treatments. Again, another tree that's real prevalent through Gateway Boulevard is the Hong Kong orchid. I think these are very effective trees to use for color. They provide more color throughout the year than any other flowering tree in our area. They're a good choice to use. They're messy, they're brittle, and they tend to get a little kind of awkward looking, and they do require some maintenance. But they give you the most flowering aspect of any other tree.
What's it called?
Hong Kong orchid.
Hong Kong.
Yeah, because they flower twice a year. Unlike poincianas and tababuyas that give you a lot of dazzling color in the spring, but they only flower once. Hong Kongs do give you a little more longevity of color, so to speak, and they are a good street tree to use. Coming up through where a lot of the change of pace comes in when we enter some of the communities, some are more well taken care of than others. And again, coming through the statement and coming in through here again, this is where there is some opportunity to make visual improvements along Gateway Boulevard and the roadways. And you can start to see, again, where the commercial properties, I believe, are lacking their required buffers, because you're looking right into the parking lots in some cases. And again, as we talked about along Daniels, is the proliferation of illegal signage. You can see a lot of that here with especially these feather signs that retailers love to use because they draw attention. But they are very quite the dramatic eyesore in your landscape. And here's some indications where you do have some exposed utilities that could be treated, that need to be treated in the application of adding landscape into the common areas as we go through this. We can make some improvements where these could be easily taken out of scene. But again, you can see right into the commercial areas here where those treatments could be used more effectively. Another areas is where lakes and golf course come into play on Gateway Boulevard. These are prime attributes that brings in some of the surrounding benefits of the area, looking into the golf course, looking into the lakes. And I believe these are areas where we don't want to proliferate a lot of understory landscape to hide those views. You want to play off those views and looking into it. To the degree the golf course doesn't take any issue with it bordering on Gateway Boulevard, I don't think Gateway Boulevard should take any issue in providing the views into the golf courses, because that is a primary thing that's a benefit to anybody driving up down the road. Again, looking back through, they have put the fence up there to separate the uses. That's a pretty effective use. And I've played golf and I've played on Gateway recently a couple times over the past year. And it really is one of the finer golf courses in the area. And when you're coming through here, Gateway Boulevard really doesn't come into, it really doesn't come into your perception much when you're playing that hole. It's just the way that hole lays out. So I would think, again, as I'm trying to say, where we have those exposures to the golf course, I think we need to play off of them as much as you can. Again, some of the areas where that corner, you take away all the pollution of illegal signage, that's not a bad treatment there. But the illegal signage there really turns that into an eyesore. Again, this is Town Lake Square, I believe. Again, I'd have to look, part of our assessment will be to look into the specifics of their permit, but it looks like they're not compliant with their development order because there are no shrubs that buffers that parking lot from the road. Again, this is again another, I believe we did touch on this a bit yesterday, or at the last meeting regarding Gateway, or Daniels Boulevard, I'm sorry. But here's an area where if you had the required buffering along the parking lot, the Town Lake sign kind of gets lost in the buffer. And this is again where we have some of the inherent conflicts between sign setbacks and landscape buffers. There could be a compromise established here where the landscape buffer comes in. We could get this sign out a little farther where it is more effective, and it renders the need for these types of signs out here to be removed. Use of, kind of the use of the bimodal paths. This is well done on Gateway Boulevard and out on Griffin, where you have the 8-foot bike and sidewalks. There is a bit of an issue when you have only one-sided sidewalks in your roadways. Even coming in today, I noticed a bus letting some students out, and the students are literally walking up the other side of the road in the grass, because it probably defeats the purpose for them to go over to the sidewalk, walk to where they're going, and then to come back over. Because there's probably not a sidewalk that ties back in because there isn't a sidewalk back on the other side. And again, as part of our inventory analysis, is that something in a goals and objective standpoint, do you guys want to look into having sidewalks on both sides of your road, your public roads and Gateway? I think that's a question that I would ask, that would look an answer to, if that's something that would need to be part of our program. Again, coming in through the end cap, signature end cap of the cabbage palms, and coming up into where the lakes start to play into a very vital aesthetic role in the streetscape. And this is a good area where one of the lakes really blends in and gives you that environmental aesthetic, soft perception of the road. In the streetscaping here, we could do some things that helps play off of that to give it a little more of an environmental treatment, where these pines kind of look a little lost by themselves. We could come in and populate this area with some other native plants to play off of that natural aspect.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
Bill, in that situation, did you happen to look at those pines and
Yeah.
analyze them?
I haven't gotten.
Or evaluate them?
I know that John went out and did some of those. I looked at some of the ones on the other side. I didn't notice any borer holes.
Yeah.
But I've seen some of the pines out there that do have the borer holes in them.
Okay.
And you know how those are. They can sit dormant and
Right.
for years and never be an issue, but once they get excited for some reason, they take the trees out in great numbers. These particular ones, I know we did photos on it, and John was doing this segment, and I haven't read that part of our report yet, so I don't know if those actually have borers in them or not. Let's hope they don't. I mean, have you guys discovered a lot of pine borer issues out here generally?
I haven't really heard of any. I've just, that photo just kind of
Right.
stimulated the question.
And it does, when you look at those look stressed. They look like they're stressed pines. And that, I don't know if that's just they have never recovered from the development went around them, but those pines have probably been there since the road went in, so you would think they would have recovered long ago from any impact they had from the development. But some of the pines out there do look like they're stressed pines. And some of the ones that I looked through, I didn't notice any pine borer holes in them. But some of them still look like they're stressed, and I'm not sure if you guys have gotten any feedback on why that seems to be occurring, or if it's just the natural state of the pines.
I know I have removed, in in the last year, probably 100 pine trees off of Gateway Boulevard. It's either for the pine bark or the needle blight. Some of them is obviously bark
borers.
borers. Some of them maybe like these, and I don't know
That
if
looks
it's a
like
needle
it
blight or
that
if
looks
it's
like
just
a blight.
stressing- Huh?
Those look like they have blight.
But they don't recover from that.
No.
No, and we know the
Like I
borers
say,
are lethal,
Up and down the boulevard, I've removed at least 100 pine trees this year.
just this year.
For this condition, yeah. And I know that there's a few more up there right in that area right now that are gonna have to come down soon. I just didn't wanna clear cut everything all at once.
No, just as needed.
What success have you had with adding pines back in? Have you introduced pines into it?
I have not tried planting pines back in. They don't generally do well if they're in an area that gets irrigation.
Yeah.
And they don't really like to be transplanted to start with.
Nope.
Get them as a seedling and put them in, they tend to do fine, but.
Right, or a 10-gallon,
She
or
does.
the smaller gallonage pines tend to take off if you leave them alone.
Right.
Yeah, you can irrigate them for a year or two, but if they're in an irrigated landscape, they don't tend to.
This kind of tends to happen.
Yep, that's good to know. Again, looking back in through how the lakes really, I think, provide a great opportunity to play off the nature of Gateway Boulevard. These are positive aspects in the landscape. And this one I threw out there is kind of an interesting piece here. It's a very odd residential piece when you look at it. It's got an odd shape to it. It's kind of an odd size for somebody to come in and probably pay the amount of money that a private owner wants for that to put residential on a piece that small. I don't know if there is any will.
I think that's a commercial parcel, Bill.
I thought, when I looked at it.
Did you look it up?
I thought it was zoned residential.
Oh, really?
Mm.
Okay.
I may be wrong, but from the initial assessment we had on it, that was zoned residential.
Okay.
Which if it was well, somebody could buy it and go through the zoning process on it, but it seems like a very odd piece to develop residentially, that piece there. I don't know if there's any will from the services district or the board standpoint to pick that up as a common property.
Do you know how many acres it is?
I think it was 2.3, something like that. That's the number, it's in my head, and forgive me for not bringing that data with me.
Does anybody have any idea of where the fire department is looking? They're looking at another piece of property to build an additional station in Gateway.
That'd be a good station.
I just got a message, yeah, that's what I was thinking, because that'd probably be enough property for them, so I don't know if that's the site that they're looking at or not. But I had a message from Chief Lombardo, I can reach out to him and see by chance.
Well, if the fire district picked that up, then you could probably have a common element associated with it, because that's somewhat of a quasi-public use. I mean, you could use that as a trailhead, so to speak. I mean, there's some benefit if the fire department picked that up. So you could plan that into your common area design. So I could look at that as an opportunity if you guys want me to go in that direction.
I'll find out.
Again, some of the other areas coming up Gateway Boulevard, again, this is kind of like when you look at the landscape changes a little bit where the residential walls come into play. Kind of this is a hole in the landscape that kind of takes away from the regular rhythm that we would address as part of the design program. Coming around the bends, coming into, forgive me, I forgot the name of this one.
Timber Ridge.
Timber Ridge, thank you, Kevin.
Mhm.
I mean, one of the nicer entries coming in through, getting back into the feel of it, coming up around Griffin Boulevard. Again, the Griffin Boulevard, and I know I've heard some chatter and I guess there was some ideas at some point of turning this into a roundabout. I don't know if that's something that you guys would want to consider in the big picture master planning, that this area may have a roundabout in it. It's a pretty busy intersection. It's one of those intersections that's right in between the need of a light. I'm sure some people would like a light there, and I'm sure other people wouldn't want a light there. Because when you're driving up and down a road, going to work, you want to minimize how many traffic lights you come into contact in a given day. But this seems like it's got enough area around it where it could lend itself to a roundabout. So if that's something that you guys would want to see as part of the program, that's something that we could have in as part of a master plan element, throw it out there and see what
Yeah, we're
people
turning
think
those
of
roads
it.
over to Lee County, so that's gonna be a Lee County review type of thing. It's definitely becoming a dangerous intersection.
Yeah.
I leave there every
Yeah.
night.
Yeah.
people
And the speed there is pretty
zigzagging through
heavy.
the 7-Eleven parking lot, yeah, it's not good.
And the way people come into that turn, that speed is deceptive. It's kind of deceptive of how quickly cars come from south to north there, going north. I've noticed that I can see some people don't gauge the speed on that road very well when they're making that turn, that left turn out. But it seems, in Lee County, it seems to be very warm to roundabouts in general, but as you know, you have to design them at the right scale for them to work. You know, I think we talked earlier about like the ones in Hill Avenue in the city, they don't work. The one in Estero works very well.
Yeah.
The one via Coconut works very well. But that's an idea here. Again, looking at those intersections here, coming through, again, I've noticed a lot of the commercial developments on Gateway Boulevard seem to lack the required buffers. There seems to be a consistency of none of them having what I foresee as the required buffers in place. And again, that's the private ownership side that has an impact on your roadway. And looking through, there are areas where it could do a better job of hiding some of the utilities. As he noticed, it seems like utility engineers always like to put them in the most visible places as opposed to the most functional. But albeit as that may, we can do what we can to try to blend them out of the landscape. Again, the way the lakes come into play here is a very powerful statement. And then looking back into here, this is where I've always I like to see head walls on lakes because it allows you the opportunity on the land side to get close to the water. The downside of those is that they create some visual challenges on the water side, and this is one that I think that would needs to be addressed one way or the other, that doesn't have a very appealing look to it. Again, some cases where you have the right landscape that just seems to be, juniper is a pretty good plant to use in streetscaping here. This is just a case where you have a plant that's just old and tired. It probably just needs to be taken out and replanted with another plant or even the same variety. But there are some cases where the landscape is just old and it probably needs to be taken out and replanted. And again, coming in over here, this is Pittosporum, and Pittosporum does okay in shade, but it's a high-maintenance streetscape plant. So again, you look at areas like this, where replanting is necessary. But again, one of the things that we'll look in our assessments of this is areas, if you're gonna replant, they should be in areas where that replanting has a benefit, has an aesthetic benefit to the community. And when you're looking at, planting up against a vacant or a future lot, I think you ought to minimize your assets of what, applying your assets against the unknown. And the intersection coming up through, this is the one on the north side of that commercial. The next kind of transition into how Gateway Boulevard changes its appearance a little bit, where it comes into the residential walls. These in general are pretty good, and this to me is an indication where you have the lack of the sidewalk on the one side, because we have the multi-purpose sidewalk on the other side, and no sidewalk on the east side. And you come into situations where some of these sidewalks don't make a lot of sense to them, especially when you come to the intersections. There's no real crossing element there because you're not crossing back to a sidewalk system. So some of these residential intersections are daunting from a pedestrian standpoint, because you really don't know how to negotiate them. And really, if you stand there, you really tend to wonder where you should go. There's no crosswalk. You can't put a crosswalk in the road if it doesn't tie into another crosswalk. So the intersections don't have crosswalks, and they tend to be pretty dangerous for any pedestrian. Again, getting back into the consistency of the Gateway Boulevard standard with the oaks coming into where the clubhouse is. This is the only one that really has the dominant Royal Palm application to it. This is probably one of the oldest intersections in Gateway, and it's still, after all these years, still looks pretty good. Again,
Actually, I redid that, Bill. It used to have oaks there in the center. They redid them, put the Royal Palms in there probably, 3 years ago?
2 to 3 years ago, yeah. Yeah, must have been
They did.
when this
Yeah.
committee was just starting.
Yeah,
I don't think I remember that with oak trees in there.
yeah.
Well, it actually looks good that way. It has a strong feel, because as you're coming through all those oaks and you get that bit of a change, it's it's a powerful statement of taking you in that direction, so I don't think they hurt themselves by taking the oaks out in that regard. But that is a very good-looking entryway coming through. Again, looking at the proliferation of color under here, where in this case, it works. It's the right plant in that environment, and it does give you color. And then looking through, when you have the situation here where, you know, I like oak trees and lawn, I think, is a very elegant look. It's a nice look, but one of the difficulties is, in a situation like this, it's very difficult to keep grass growing in that environment. So you really can't make that effectively work there, so this probably needs to be met with ground covers. And there are ground covers that you can use that'll work well, that are low maintenance. Again, coming out, and this is, kind of, for the life of me, I am having brain leakage, and we're forgetting the name of the communities coming through this particular photograph. But coming into this one seems, you come out of this, it's kind of a vacant feel to it, and it has what I'd say, it's a hole in the streetscape theme. It doesn't feel as Cypress Point, it doesn't feel as strong when you come through here. And the wall features here do not seem to be as consistent with the others. And through redevelopment of the streetscape, you can improve this where it doesn't, with a minimal amount of application, I might add, with, and keeping the consistency of what you're seeing driving up prior to it. Again, the overwhelming consistency of the oaks through Gateway Boulevard, and coming into Callaway Green and the by the church here. Again, these are trees I really do not like to see in the streetscape. Queen palms, they tend to be just big weeds. They're very, very difficult to maintain in a quality state, and these are starting to look, getting into that state where there's really nothing you can do with them that they're going to ever look any better. But again, this aspect of the streetscape is on private property. But I don't know if there is, again, if we have a planning committee and people associated with there, would they want to volunteer, or would they want to participate in a master plan and how they may want to redo their main entries to move into where Gateway will be going with their roadways. This is probably the one intersection that needs the most help from a landscape perspective, in my opinion. Again, the multimodal path, fabulous environment for people to walk or ride bikes on. Again, another lake scenario here where having the oak, the lawn into the lake is a very powerful, and it's a good aesthetic element. I wanted to come back here. Here's another thing I've noticed, more so out on Daniels, but also along in Gateway, where we have a lot of cases where the cabbages are literally growing up into the canopies of the oak trees. And to a large degree, they're just detrimental to the long-term growth of those oaks, allowing those oaks to spread out. There's probably a good opportunity to just thin these out and to either remove them or relocate them. As we know, relocating cabbage palms is not always the most cost-effective thing to do, but from an environmental stewardship standpoint, it's always good to try to reuse what you have. So there's a lot of situations through Gateway Boulevard where you could take a lot of these cabbage palms out that would actually improve the landscape. Coming in again, the lake situation, coming close to Gateway Commons, the fence as it applies to it. And again, these are areas you really don't want to add to. This is a very nice aesthetic element that's consistent throughout Gateway, is bringing that natural side into the streetscape. And where some of the residential walls could use some assistance from the street side. I believe the area between the sidewalk and the wall is private property. So this would be probably, you'd want to have them participate in improving the boulevard, where maybe that homeowners association could just put some shrubs in along their wall there. It would help bring up the aesthetic of the road on their property. And we can identify those as part of the master plan. In coming close to the Commons area and the intersection at the Commons area, it's another one of those areas that's a little, this doesn't have the signature end caps. It seems, when you come into this area, it seems pretty weak. It just doesn't have the same feel when you're driving through Gateway Boulevard here. But when you come in and take the left in the Commons, it's a very strong element looking in, but that particular intersection doesn't have a lot of power to it. And as you can see there, it's just the light poles and open areas. That area probably needs to have some renovation to it.
Now, would an area like that, Bill, be tentatively a good place to recycle some of those stables that you have that theme coming?
And you just took the thought right out of my head, JB, is being that is kind of the end cap statement throughout Gateway Boulevard, and you have the ability to take a lot of those out of there to improve it, what better place to reintroduce them into the landscape where you're getting straight benefit out of
Where
it?
you already have that theme.
Right, or you could put them
In an
down along the
open
lake
area.
areas,
Yeah.
to where you wanna use them as a natural element,
Right.
because they are cabbage palms, you could use them along the lakes. Being that, we both know that it costs as much or more to relocate one than it does to buy one, it would probably be, I would think a lot of those cabbage palms we're gonna take out of those situations where they're growing up into the oaks, the heads are probably turned a bit. They may not be the most, stately.
People pay for that, Bill.
But people pay for that. That's true, but if you get the ones that are twisted and turned enough and you put them in a group, it could really look pretty cool on those. And I think that's just something you look at, you kinda get out there, those would work there. So to answer your question, I think absolutely that's a good way to recycle that material. Again, this is one of the newer intersections. This is Hampton, I believe.
Hampton Park.
Hampton Park. This one's a little newer, and they're using the date palms here, but, and then this is I get back in, we go to the Commons, the view back into the Commons from Gateway Boulevard. And this really is, for being probably your most important community asset outside of the soccer park, and, it's a different use here. It doesn't have much curb appeal from the street when you're looking back at it. This is the transition turning up past, is it the New Life Church, I believe? Is it New Life? Is that what it's called? Next level church. And again, that intersection, some of these intersections out here lack that end cap treatment that you're getting down on the more southerly reaches of Gateway Boulevard. Again, the turn here, some of the, again, getting back to where you got utilities that we could use some help in cleaning up and buffering these utilities from the road without really conflicting with their purpose either. And now we're making the transition up towards, going up towards where the power lines are. Again, Ligustrums is a very good tree to use, especially when you're getting into your turn lanes where you got frangible tree issues. These are great low-maintenance trees. They're a little expensive to purchase, but they do very well, and they're consistent with the theme that you have on Gateway Boulevard. I think utilizing them even more would be a good thing in this case. Again, where you've got a lot of the grasses, these are gonna start to fail where they're back in under the oaks, but where they're out with the cabbage palms, the grasses do very well in the roadways. Again, in some cases, they just look like they need to be, some of those areas just need to be replanted. I know that's part of the program that you had talked about, April, is that there's a regular budget to go back in and to add plants. And in some cases, there's a lot of places where that's apropos to do, is just go back in and continue to feed those beds that are devoid some of the plants. Again, coming by the Next Level Church and heading out. Now we're heading out towards the power line, which has its own issues and own theme to it. And I think we all know that this area here is where the road collapses from 4 to 2 lane. And unlike Griffin Boulevard, where that would probably not be 4 laned in any of our lifetimes, this road possibly may, depending on growth, but this is probably the one area where Gateway, or one of the roads, would probably be expanded. So what you do landscaping in here absolutely should respect any future growth here, because this could happen inside, as we talked earlier, that, a master plan usually has a lifespan of 10 to 15 years. This is a possibility where that road could be improved inside of 10 to 15 years. So I think we ought to be respecting that in the way we program and design this. And with that said, coming through here, it does have some visual limitations to it. The power lines amplify that as well. But what's out there seems to work pretty well. You just lose the feel of it because of the distance the material is off the road. And of course, where we're coming in underneath the power lines themselves, you've got to use trees that only get certain maximum heights. I'm not a big fan of using hollies in Florida. I think they're tempered trees that just do not do well here. I think there's other material that would serve much better than using hollies here. But I don't think there's a whole lot you can do through this reach that isn't already contextually being done here. So I'm looking for any feedback that you guys may have in that regard. But it seems like because of the power line and the FPL easement there, and the possibility that this road may be improved, really does limit what could be, excuse me, what could be done out in that area. Now, coming down, kind of down through where, coming up to the 82 intersection, and this area I know was where it was, had issues with the turnover and taking the royals out of that median, moving up closer to the road and then re-landscaping this area here. And as most landscape design is, landscape is pretty much art. You're working within certain parameters, but it's relatively an artistic thing. And as an artist or landscape architect, I could stand up here and shoot holes in why that's wrong and why this looks terrible. But all in all, when you look at this design and what was put there, I can understand whoever the landscape architect was that did this, why he chose this material and why he designed it this way all makes sense to me. It's all correct. It all seems to be consistent with Green Book and life safety standards. So at least the program that was used here, whether you like the aesthetic of that or not, is well done and was thought out. So I mean, I don't think there's any point in shooting holes in the purpose of this or what application you have. The only thing that I've noticed is when you come in through here is that it does have an overwhelming sense of just palm tree. It's like a palm farm almost. It's just too much of one thing as you're driving through there. And I think you can mitigate that by just breaking that up with a frangible tree in that some of these view sheds as you're coming into it, where you're just breaking up the linear look of those palms. And you could use that by essentially creating visual rooms by bringing something into that view plane that breaks that up. And that would change the dynamic of that completely without really changing the design of it, or really without getting into too much expensive redoing anything. I mean, what you have here works pretty well based on the parameters of that particular part of the street. It works well, and you could fix that by
Well, the
doing
con-
very little to it.
Yeah, excuse me, Bill, but the concerns there were, with trees, is how they like to spread.
Mhm.
And that's such a tight area that then you come in conflict with, the vehicles, the larger vehicles,
Yep.
so. And with the oaks on the side, it was kind of felt that you did have that massiveness on the sides with the oaks.
Again.
So, I mean,
and-
that's really why I wasn't broken up with anything bigger, because there were suggestions. Silver buttonwood was one of the
I
suggestions.
mean, you
Or
could
oleander
even,
trees. It was
maybe
just, you know,
even
we're trying to
something
keep
that's
people
more
off the
columnar.
road, yeah.
Yeah, and again, Jimmy, as I was getting back to, you may not want to do anything to that.
Yeah.
And it really depends on what's the overriding feeling of, is this a good or a bad thing here? And to tell you the truth, I think it's both. But
Right.
from the bad side of it, the only thing I think it needs to be done is broken up a little bit, because it'd take the kind of the, I don't want to use monotony, is probably the wrong word, but just the over rhythmic the nature of the palms in there. I think you could just break that up with a couple pieces placed along, at some strategic locations along the way without doing much to it. It's not a bad landscape. It's not, and it's a correct application.
Are you talking about inserting something taller or shorter in between the palms?
Like JB had pointed out, when you're getting especially back into, like, that's a pretty good area here. Putting something in here that gets too much of a head on it creates a real problem, because if you're driving a truck down a road that narrow, that really poses some functional problems. But as long as you get something in here that's columnar or that can be shaped, that doesn't really start to grow out into here. I mean, ligustrums could work, or you could even use smaller material, even like Jatropha's, if you wanted to use something that was a little more delicate, but just gave you something of a greener break, a different type of visual break in there.
What's the maintenance level on something like that?
They're higher.
Yeah,
Well,
and
and-
that's a
yeah.
dangerous intersection.
Yeah.
And I think, to be.
That's an important concern, April. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and that really was the big issue that. Jatropha's were brought up, silver buttonwoods were brought up.
Yep.
Oleander trees,
Not a big fan of oleanders, but.
well, here again,
But I
you
know,
go
but-
back to art,
Yep.
it's all in
And
the
you're
eye of the
absolutely right.
beholder, and you could also be the devil's advocate from the aspect of looking at the rest of the boulevard, with the, I'm just being the devil's advocate, understand that, I'm not advocating removing oak trees, but the massiveness of the oak trees that we have too. There could be a strong opinion that says, oh, we have too many of those, so, sometimes decisions can't please everybody.
No, you can't. And the reason I'm kind of even having this discussion in that respect is that when I first was hired, there was somebody that brought this up as being a major problem, and it was a terrible thing that happened to Gateway. And I'm looking at it and I go, it's really not a terrible thing in my humble opinion. I think this is fine. I mean, it works.
And that's, I think, what we were looking at, the safety factor, the less time we can have people out there on that road, because when you come out of that curve, it's like a slingshot.
It is, it's a very.
It's narrow, they move fast, it's not a good place to have workers.
No, no.
And it's not unreasonable to think that, probably have to, I don't know if they even have any, if Lee County probably doesn't at this stage, now that they're just taking the roads over, but they probably don't have any plans at expanding that in any time soon.
No.
But if any road in Gateway is going to be improved, it's probably this part of Gateway Boulevard is
Yeah,
the one I would
north,
think.
south.
So what you do in terms of improvement within the confines of the road there, I think you ought to be very careful with. Again, and looking what's done through here, it works pretty well. I mean, to me, that looks really good. It's a totally different theme and feel that you get in anywhere else in Gateway Boulevard, but it works from a design perspective. So I guess it comes down to is how does the community in general feel about that?
Right.
And if anything needs to be done, I guess the recommendation I would say is to just do it within the confines of that roadway and with the existing landscape. I don't think you really want to change much of that. You might want to augment it a little bit to make it appear a little different, but I don't think you really want to change much of that. The only part of this area here that gave me some trouble, and again, that, as you're coming right down into that looks pretty good. To me, I think that looks pretty good. And it's just totally different than everything else in Gateway Boulevard, but there's nothing aesthetically, or certainly nothing functionally wrong with that design. The one area, again, when you're looking in here, you've got how powerful that you have symmetry with that. I mean, this is a very kind of a symmetrical approach as you're entering, especially when you're coming through. It's a very, very symmetrical design in terms of its impression. The only part of it that gave me a little trouble is that it continues to be very symmetrical on the northbound lane going out, but it's not symmetrical at all on the southbound lane coming in. And it just, that part of it to me looks odd. And it almost seems to me that it would probably have looked better to leave the Royals in the middle, because you really can't put Royals over here because of the nature of these oak trees.
Right.
They dominate and own that side of the road. But just adding the Royals, if you took the Royals out of this side, then you have that asymmetrical symmetry where you've got the Royals down the middle, and then they feed into the Royals down the side. I mean, that's the only part of this design that just struck me as a designer as being off, is that you have the Royals over here and you have none over there.
Right.
So it's like this off-balance thing. And to me, that was the only part of that whole design that felt awkward to me. It was that. And to some degree, if you could take these out, use them elsewhere in the design, and that could be one element that you could do to make that look a little more consistent with the rest of Gateway. And with that said, you could probably bring in some oak trees here that starts to make it feel more like Gateway Boulevard as you're driving down the other side of it. Again, these are just suggestions I'm thinking out loud with you from a assessment standpoint, and we'll get into that a little more detail as we go through the design program. And then looking up and down as you're approaching Gateway Boulevard from 82. As we know, the power lines there really pose some aesthetic challenges. They are what they are. They're never going to go away. And you're going to kind of have to deal with those with the edge landscape that you got going on there. The old Stony Brook sign, which is now a gateway sign, it looks totally different than the sign on the other end. Obviously, this just needs to have some treatments done to it to bring it into the newer context of what you're doing with Gateway. Again, that's, as we had talked about, is just having the information of looking at that and how that may play into the bigger picture on the master plan. But I think this is one area that would probably need some help, another look at it, so to speak. Okay, we'll jump off of Gateway and come into, let's go into Griffin Boulevard. Okay, now Griffin Boulevard out at 82. Again, the power lines there do pose a problem, but it's kind of one of the original themes of Gateway was the kind of, I like to use the understated elegance of the hardscape signs there in Gateway over here. They're a bit lost in the context of the road out there, because I believe when this went in, that was just a 2-lane road. Back in '84 when that road went in, and now that that's a 4-lane and possibly even a 6-lane road in too long, those signs do get a bit lost, but to some degree, I just think through lighting and the appropriate landscaping, you can bring those to life and give them the appropriate application they need there. Power lines do pose a problem for how you see the signage there. And again, then the street markers here, I think, work very well. They're a little low, but they work very well in terms of identifying the streets. Did I switch this? Oh, this thing switched over on me. I apologize. I had one at the tail end, then it came back to the other. Now, looking at the intersection of Griffin and Gateway, I'd mentioned, is this, I would suggest that maybe we do look into maybe a roundabout application here. Otherwise, what you would do here from a landscape standpoint, I think is kind of minimal treatment. There's not much that needs to be done at this intersection from a landscape standpoint. I think a lot of that context is there, and with the unknown that's going on with the commercial piece on the northeast, there's not a whole lot you can do over there without knowing how that parcel is going to develop. But as that parcel develops, maybe there ought to be at least something in writing or something that gives them some direction as to how they ought to treat that side of their project when they develop it. And there ought to be some cooperation with who that private developer is when they develop that piece of property. Again, pretty strong intersection. It has that kind of the signature end cap. Looking, that's what I was talking about over here. There are some oaks that have been, were planted there in the day. You've got that context there. It probably should be picked up as that comes back down, as that piece develops. I think if you did that there, it's a very successful intersection. It just looks a little bare there at this stage, but I think the opportunity for it is there. Again, looking across the street over at Fairway Lakes, this is a standpoint of the balance of that look here, and looking back out, it's the same kind of treatment that you have with the end caps along Gateway Boulevard. Looking down into Gateway Boulevard here, start to get the feel of more of a cabbage palm oak feel here. And this is looking back out when you're coming out of the 7-Eleven. And these areas here, they look pretty stark. They really give the community some feeling of being unfinished, or just doesn't quite have that finished look to it. Would you want to come in here and add any plant material in or not? Between inside the right-of-way, that could be a suggestion we make. But typically, I would think that if this piece develops, the access road to this piece is probably going to be right here. It's going to be straight across from that intersection. That's probably a given that would be there. So it gives you some opportunity to find places to start planting trees on either side of that, to start to give that some streetscape feeling. And I just identified, that's a carrot wood. Actually surprised that carrot wood is in the landscape here. It's probably something that ought to point out the L needs to be taken out. But there are some exotic plant material here that it could use some maintenance. Another lake treatment here. These are, I took some of these pictures that indicate we're cleaning these up and actually providing a little more view through them and into the lakes would probably be more beneficial than really adding anything to them. Again, a very kind of park-like feel coming down through Griffin Boulevard. Again, Griffin, you come in through here, it was planned as a 4-lane road. As we said, I don't think any of us would ever see this road be 4-laned in our lifetime. So there's not a whole lot of opportunity to do things along here that you're not within that future right-of-way. But if you look at the context of Griffin Boulevard through here, it really doesn't need much. There's a lot of very powerful, especially this leg of it here, it's pretty strong. And I believe Elle had mentioned that the district came in and placed some of these groups of cabbage palms in various places along Griffin Boulevard, especially on the, I guess that's south and the east side of Griffin Boulevard. I think that was a very astute thing to do there, because if that road does improve, they're easy, you can pop them out of there. They do give that some flavor, but they do give it that off balance. And I don't know if the community or if you guys, how strongly you feel about the road lacking that same kind of balance the Gateway Boulevard and Commercial and Commerce Lakes has. Maybe the introduction of some oaks in here to, again, as I talked about, where you have those linearity along the north end of Gateway near 82, you have some of that here on Griffin Boulevard, where just a couple select oak trees placed along there would break up that feeling that it's so asymmetrical. So there is some opportunity to do that there. However, those trees at some point in time could be, would have to be taken out if that road was improved. And just looking at Timberwood coming in through, again, this gives you an idea how that has kind of a very one-sided asymmetrical stark feel to it. And there's some opportunity to do those treatments in here. Again, coming in under where the power lines are, and this here is kind of, it's a very unsightly situation here. I mean, there's asphalt sitting in here, there's a lot of things that are still laying around in here, but that's a good opportunity where that area, being that it's in that power line area, that you could actually use that as somewhat of a trailhead, as a gathering area for somebody to come on their bikes, so they could get on trails that ride up and down the power line. And I know there's some sidewalk that goes up through the power line to the north here. There's nothing that goes to the south, but there is opportunity that you could create a pedestrian and a bike trail within that FP&L easement. There's a tremendous opportunity for park space in this area here, and this could act as somewhat of a trailhead for it. You could even have maybe coming over into here and having a small parking area. People can unload their bikes and then get out into that trailhead.
Where's that go, back to Griffin? Not Griffin, 82, that power line?
That power line goes it
Not
goes
to 82,
across,
to Daniels.
north it goes across Gateway Boulevard and kind of bisects the old landfill, which I believe that landfill is now closed.
I'm sorry, I meant to the south.
To the south, it ties into Daniels. It crosses Daniels. And I think Gateway's boundaries end before it gets to Daniels. But it would be a great opportunity if you could have a trailhead down there to really tie into that line. At some point in time, Lee County will probably turn that old landfill into a park. That's usually what happens to those, is those usually get turned over into some sort of a public element. And Gateway ties into that. So that I really see this easement as being a very great opportunity to create some pedestrian bike facilities.
And before you go on, can I ask you a question on that roundabout you were talking about? What does Lee County typically do? I know they added one to Plantation, right, or, Plantation and Crystal.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, but do they allow you to landscape in the middle of those things?
Yeah.
With some height at all? or-
Yeah, you can
Okay.
landscape in those. I mean, again, you have to follow the standards. It depends on the design speed, how big they are, whether they're curved or not. But usually you can landscape the inside of a roundabout pretty heavily. You can
Okay.
make quite a statement out of them without really impugning getting in, running awry of any of the standards. I mean, Estero is right now in the throes of really wanting to do something with theirs.
Yeah, because that one doesn't have any landscaping in it either, does it?
No. No, none of that does through there.
Yeah,
And now that they've incorporated, Lee County certainly isn't gonna be the one to do it.
right. Okay.
Again, looking in, this is another view through the lake, a lake that looks back towards the power line and the parks. This is one that could probably use a little help, just probably a little bit of improvements here to make it look less like a drainage, a detention pond, and more like a lake. So there's an opportunity to make that more of an aesthetic and park-like element. Again, looking down, as I'd mentioned here, there is no pedestrian facility that way, but there's certainly opportunity to do so. And going north, you catch right over here, there's a guy riding a bike, but there is a path, and it seems it goes about halfway up, and it has like a little turn around, and you come back down. But as you guys probably realize that anytime you're in a park or you're traveling on a bike or walking, very few people like to take the same path back that they took. And it could even be if you went up and came back a different path, it's 50 feet away from the same path you took, it's a more pleasant experience than taking the same path back. So again, there's some opportunity in here where you could really create this into being a real common area jewel and gateway. And you can plant in these. You just have to plant within the standards that FP&L will let you do it underneath these power lines. They'll let you plant in there, it's just limited in what you can do. And looking back into the soccer complex, I got some photos that are a little more specific to this. Again, another lake treatment, but again, this one I think does need some help in terms of its aesthetic impact. Looking back here, as you come through the landscape that's over here to the left, it's kind of out of the picture. When you drive into it, again, this ought to be buffered a little bit, and we can get into this in a little more detail when we talk about the park itself. But there are some landscape treatments that could be done inside of the park complex that would really make it feel more like a park. There's not a whole lot you can do. Well, I'll get into that when we get into the park pictures. Again, looking across the lake here, some buffering could help so you're not looking at the back of the sign, but looking across into the ball fields is, to some degree, there's nothing wrong with looking into those open spaces. Griffin coming down, getting down through the elementary school. Now, these are plant materials that were put in a while ago that are in the future right-of-way, but they seem to work very well there. And that's a little more of a cabbage palm kind of a treatment there. Again, this area, this is what it calls another one of those kind of an open area where there's some things that could be done that come in here to not make that feel like such a hole in the landscape. Again, how these treatments work pretty well, even though it's mostly just cabbage palm and not live oak like it is on Gateway. To me, it still has a nice streetscape feel to it. Areas like this where you have looking into the lake, those are areas that ought to be continue to be highlighted. Again, here's another look into the lake. However, you got issues with the utilities and trying to figure out a way to hide those so they don't take away from that experience of looking into the lake. And looking more down Griffin Boulevard and along through the future right-of-way, where the school sign is here. Again, the multimodal path here could use, this is an area where this ought to have as much shade put on it as you can to make this path a little easier to deal with, a little easier to navigate, and have a better experience when you're walking or riding on it. This is probably a good area out in front of the school to add some landscaping in there. And you can maybe even do it as part of a program with the school. And there are some programs and grants associated with schools that you can landscape on them. So there might be an opportunity to look into that with that portion of Griffin Boulevard or Griffin Drive. Again, looking down through with the treatments where the cabbage palms were put in the future right away, I think this is an effective way of doing the road. Some of the entries here, another lake view here. Again, these, I don't know if these were just left open by chance or if they were done by design, but I think it's really good that most of the lakes that you drive along through Gateway are exposed to the road, and I think they ought to continue to be that way. Again, coming back through Griffin, back past Silver Lakes, same type of feel here. Getting into Bristol Park and coming up on Magnolia Lakes. These were actually projects I did for Pulte many, many years ago, and these were all kind of heavy oak treatments back on their property. Again, this is where The expanse here is due to the fact you have a two-lane road in a, in a four-lane right-of-way, so to speak, four-lane design right-of-way. And I think the only way you can really fix that, so to speak, is to come in and continue that theme along through here. I know there's some talk about the school board putting a school on this site. I would hope that might come to fruition, because having a school here would probably help benefit the streetscape in a lot of ways. In the back end of Hampton, they're using their, kind of the theme they had at their main entrance is the date palms. But this entrance, just this area here, to me, when you're coming through here, looks a little weak. It needs some help. There's some things that need to be done from a streetscape standpoint to make this road feel more like Gateway, so to speak. Again, going out, the sense of exit as you're coming out of Gateway here is fantastic, because you're really picking up that whole theme right there. At least it comes back home here out at the end near 82. I mean, that part of it looks pretty good. Again, the walls here. Issue here is the fact that the hardscape is such a low level type of design, and putting anything out in the front of it obviously conflicts with it. And it's kind of odd here that we have these with the liripe behind it, and you get that kind of it's an odd combination of plant material here. These would probably be too tall because they get up into hiding the wall, so you have some difficulty in how you create color and entrance up against the wall that sits that low on the ground. I don't know if it is part of the purview of your desire to change the nature of these walls, to change the scale of them, to possibly bring them up a little higher. You could just take that same design, bring the scale of it up a little higher, bring the band up, bring the logo up, just so you can change the context of the landscape to make it work better. I don't know if that's something that you would want to put into the scope, but it's something as a landscape architect that I look at is one way you could help improve these entryways, because they're very difficult to landscape when they were built with walls that sit that low on the ground and that far off the road. Again, kind of another indication of how that's a challenge to work from both a visual and a landscape standpoint. Okay. I'm gonna roll through these S ones a lot quicker. I think I'm just over my hour. Again, Commerce Lakes, same signature kind of drive caps. Looking through Commerce Lakes, this is another area where kind of there's an opening here that's just screaming for, it's suggesting it wants something to be here. And there are a lot of areas where it looks that probably at some point in time, Chinese fan palms were put in as ground covers or as understory material, and now they've grown up into being very similar in size with the cabbage palms in some places, and that gives it kind of an odd look. That's probably one area where you can clean some of those out and use that material elsewhere. I don't know if this is particularly the one mast that had the Chinese fan palms in it, but there were a couple that I did notice that did that. Commerce Lakes in itself is much like Gateway. It's again, getting back to, I got ahead of myself a little bit, getting back to the intersection of Commerce Lakes and Gateway. This is probably the weakest looking intersection on Gateway from an aesthetic standpoint, because it is a bigger road coming into Gateway, and it just doesn't, it really just has a stark feel when you come in here. And that's probably it. I think the corners need to have some sort of a treatment that takes your eye off of the massive asphalt that you cross when you come to this intersection. Again, that gives you kind of a feel for it. It just doesn't have the same power the other intersections have. And again, it lacks the end cap kind of feeling that you're getting with the other intersections that have the cabbage palms by the lights. This one here could use a little bit of some treatments here to bring it kind of into the same context. Again, this is getting out past the scope of the common area a bit here, but the look through here kind of picks up that same theme, but it falls down closer to the intersection. Again, kind of Commerce Lakes looking out. Very strong feel of oak's canopy. And again, that oak and sitting in a lawn is a very effective streetscape kind of feel. To me, that looks really good. Now, whether that can be maintained, I think seems to be the challenge, because it's hard to keep that turf growing under those oaks unless you thin the oaks out. So I think the thought into here is figuring out ground covers that stay low and keep and maintain that look. Okay, coming through. Now this is where Commerce Lakes reaches out and you're going up towards Pelican Preserve. To me, right when you get to this point, it's almost like you have left Gateway. You've completely left. There's nothing about from this point on that even feels like Gateway anymore. But being that this kind of goes outside of our scope, I don't know if it goes outside of our scope, April, but this still is part of the Gateway community, correct?
Where the pavement ends is where
Right
we
here?
end. Mhm.
Okay.
The line in the pavement right there.
All right. Well, the suggestion might be is that this group, this CDD here, should do something to try to tie the two communities together when they do in fact landscape, because this obviously will be landscaped at some point in time. But this feels much more like your anywhere residential road in Florida. You lose the Gateway feel the second you go there.
Is that part of, does Plantation have that, or is that Arborwood,
that-
or who is that?
Arborwood?
Arborwood's the
Arbor.
community on the right from WCI.
Right.
Plantation's on the left,
I can't
but both
remember
of
what
you-
they said, what development, or what district they said that was.
Okay.
Have to look.
And that's kind of what you see coming in the Gateway from that shot. And again, the transition is night and day there. So to me, I really look at that as what you call, that's a true transitional point. Just everything changes. But with that said, getting back to my train of thought, why I took these two pictures. To me, this is a good place to put a feature that says, welcome to Gateway type of thing. I'm in Gateway. Maybe there ought to be some sort of feature, or maybe picking up some of that signage that says, now I'm in Gateway. That really seems like a great opportunity to introduce somebody driving in through there that you've now entered Gateway. Again, just some of the looks. To me, this is kind of where cabbage palms start to get a little weak. These could probably use some additional treatment just to strengthen that end cap. Again, looking back through. Reason I took this picture again, here's another lake introduction against the roadway. This is probably an area where ought to do our best to try to open up the views into that. This is one case just where a shrub just happens to be right on a nice line of sight. Taking that down, keeping that low and ground cover oriented will give you the penetrating view that takes advantage of that lake. Again, some of the utilities at the corners that could use some to be hidden from, but and also again looking back against where the roadways are up against commercial. Just you see a lot of commercial parking lots that are literally right against the road in Gateway, where there's no breakup between the parking lot and there's no shrubs or anything that breaks that up. I think there's a dearth of that could definitely be improved upon. Would do a lot to improve the aesthetic of the roadways in Gateway. And that's another look, looking back into it. Okay, I'll just jump on the West Links real quick. I have less and less pictures in these, which is a good thing. Again, West Links Boulevard coming out from Gateway. And then this is another one of those where these end cap signs, they sit so low to the ground, there's virtually nothing you can plant in or by these that doesn't end up conflicting with the signs themselves. They do pose to be a problem. Hardscape like this that sits in lawn or in real low ground cover still looks pretty good. But again, when you're trying to introduce color like this, it does create a bit of a conflict, because I look at that and it really, the landscape is not communicating with the hardscape in this situation very well at all. Again, but when you look in through here, the way the median in this intersection is down at West Links Boulevard, this is probably one of the better integrations between, in a commercial area on a main road, the way that whole median kind of meanders back to a non-median point is very, very well done. It creates a really cool space. It really gives you some opportunities to create some really neat things in landscape that are already there. And there's another scenario where it's taken where the cabbage palms are up in the oak trees. And this corner just seems to be kind of nondescript. And I would sense this is probably one of the areas or a representative situation where people in the community think it's bland. You know, everything's oak tree, everything's cabbage palm. I don't have enough variety. I can see where that's probably a representation of why people may feel that way. That there's just too much monotony in the landscape and there aren't things that break it up. And much like not using too much color along in your plant beds is as bad as not using enough accents in your canopy as well. And these are some areas where just putting something in that introduces something different will help anchor these corners. Now that getting back to where we were talking about some of the signage, along we were talking about Daniels and along Gateway Boulevard, I'm shocked that people that live in Gateway could drive by this every day and not be outraged by how absolutely ugly that is and how much that takes away from that intersection. I think there's gotta be probably a better solution of where you can put these to make them accessible to people. But having them right out there at an end cap of one of your most important intersections is at least something, as this landscape architect sees, is something that needs to be fixed. Those look just really poor. They really, really take away from your community.
You know, they've been there so long, it's part of the landscape, but
It
now you
is.
say it, it's.
It's our
It
hearts.
is, it is, just, it becomes part of the fabric, but you know, I look at that, I was like, oh my God. You know, I wanna get my newspaper, but holy cow. Yeah, that's what you're paying me, to look at stuff like that. And getting back into that median, I'll roll through these pretty quick, is I think this median, as you come in off of West Links, is really cool. There are so many neat things about that median, that even just the turf and the trees in it make it work. And there's a couple areas where, you know, where you have an opening, where, like in through here, where maybe taking the cabbages out or putting something in that, you know, even like a poinciana tree, something that gives it different, gives you a little more power or more pow. There are some things that you can do to change out that was kind of what I saw. This is a good opportunity to put something bold, statement type of there, without doing much to change the context of that median, which in itself looks pretty good as it is. Again, another area is light poles up in trees and cabbage palms up in them as well. And this is the other end cap at West Links Boulevard, which I think is pretty well done. And again, the other one on the other side, now West Links Drive. Again, the nature of these signs do pose issues with the type of plants that you can use in front of them or near them. Again, you have to keep cropping them, and then these end up getting leggy. I don't know, I want to get back to, is there any consideration you might want to raise those, make those signs a little higher? Or you just want to go ahead and deal with using the right kind of landscaping in there? Commons area, let's jump into the Commons area real quick. End cap the columns, same consistent feature coming through the community. Very nice intersection driving into the Commons itself. Great pedestrian features coming into it, feel for it. Winding in through here with lighting and lakes. Everything about coming in through here is very, very well done. Lake feature on Park, very well done. And starts to fall down a little bit right as you come into the park itself. And I can understand the need you have to have security in through here. And I'm not sure, is there a reason why there's 6-foot fences? Or these are actually 8-foot fences that go around this facility? Because they kind of give it a bit of almost like a high school look.
Is
And
that the
not-
pool?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's coming into the
Just
pool.
from a safety perspective. They still have kids climbing it.
Yeah, and I realize that it's the nature, especially the litigious world we live in, that you gotta secure your facilities anymore. But the way it's done here is that the fencing could be farther out, where it doesn't feel like you're in a cage, or you can take the fencing a little farther away from the common area park, where it's not so evident that you're surrounded by fencing in there. Or you ought to do a better job of landscaping it so it just doesn't look as harsh. Because that just aspect of it right in there takes so much away from coming into the common area, is just you get hit with that big fence. Especially when you look at how well, you got a nice winding drive with medians that are well landscaped. Everything about it is very well done. And you just have a little bit of issue with the fencing there. The facility itself, the Washingtonians here are starting to grow out of scale. So you have some scale issues with the material in and around the pool immediately. Feeling I get is when you're at the pool, I mean, it's a very nice facility. I mean, you've got showers and bathrooms, and you got even a concession facility there. You have everything you need, but it just has a stark feel to it when you're out on that deck. And most pools, you know, people want to be in the sun, but people also want to be able to get in the shade. There's virtually nowhere to get in shade on this pool deck that isn't under an umbrella. So I would think that there's probably some opportunity in the bringing some material in here that gives that facility a little more of a pedestrian feel to it. It looks very stark. Again, architecturally, that's a fabulous facility. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this thing from an architectural standpoint. It just seems to lack some definition with using landscape to create some pedestrian environment to it. You know, like, does that really look like a comfortable place to go to a hot tub? It just doesn't. It lacks pedestrian scale, but it's a great element to have in your park. And again, with the fence being right on it, I think there'd be a better opportunity to either hide that fence or maybe move the fence a little farther away and then hide it where you don't really feel like you're inside of a stockade, so to speak. It just doesn't feel as park-like as it could. I don't know, April, is there any, the suggestion I have is this facility in itself probably ought to have its own long-term master plan. Because obviously you have a lot of space out here that is part of the common area.
Yeah, and I would imagine that there's probably not going to be much investment made on the landscaping until we determine in a capital improvement program. You know, I think at one point in time, they had a large-scale plan to change the use of that net tennis courts and stuff, and that didn't get approved. So I think probably enough time has passed now, and the demographics have changed enough in Gateway that we probably need to revisit again, but we don't have the appropriate capital improvement plan right now to actually, you know, start providing some focus on that with appropriate budgeting plan as well.
And with that said, it's very difficult to make suggestions of what you do to it when you really don't know what's gonna happen around it.
But we do have, we are looking at a facility upgrade. So I did write down your idea as far as the shade and stuff, and potentially maybe with the facility upgrade, because the doors are all rusted, it's metal framing on the doors, and so the buildings themselves, the pool decking, we are looking at, maybe adding like a wet zone play area. As far as the pool facility itself, we have some available budget for that. And so maybe we can do some soft landscaping with that part of the project, just to
Okay.
enhance it.
And we'll have that part of our program. Again, looking back at it, I mean, the facility just, I mean, it lacks a sense of place in the streetscape, so to speak, and that's the reason I
Some of the
took these.
Washingtonian palms are gone. They got struck by lightning, so,
Oh, recently?
yeah, the ones on the south side of the pool, I think there was 4.
It took all 4 out?
Two or 3 were struck, and we took the other one out, cause it looked long.
Hey.
It was just-
Yeah, they don't look right sitting there. The only thing about Washingtonia is they grow so fast and they get tall.
And they were messy,
Mhm.
so.
And then coming over to the soccer park project, again, looking in, the parking lot itself has got tons of canopy in it. I don't think you'd probably want to invest in a lot of plant material out in your parking lot, but, I mean, the parking lot in itself, I think is pretty good looking. However, I think there might be some ideas set forth and maybe better places to locate your dumpsters or maybe to hide them.
We're looking at that, and we do have one of our first priorities with the, facility upgrade that we're doing over there is, adding a concrete enclosure with gates that actually fit the 2 cans.
Oh, there you go.
But we've been working on that.
Yeah. Then getting back to some of the other ones I've shown there, the parking lot as you see it from out on Gateway Boulevard, that's probably the area that could use some treatment, so at least when you're driving into it, you're not focused into looking at the sea of parking there. One of the things I noticed is that even on the other side, I came up, and I was out here in the prime of day on a Saturday, and then I come out another time in the middle of the day during the week, and these gates were all locked, which struck me as odd that a park was locked. I'm not sure why that there is no pedestrian access into these during those hours. Is there a reason for that?
The soccer fields, I'm not sure when you were there, it was probably when they were closed down during the rainy season. It gets really wet and they do a lot of treatment.
They try to keep people off of them?
Yeah, and so they keep people off of them. I guess they were having, for a while before I got here, they were having a problem with some small adult leagues coming in on the weekends and stuff and really tearing up the fields. But it does get closed down for the field treatments.
Gotcha.
for-
Well, now I
for the rainy
understand.
season.
Okay, that was, the other one that I'd
And it's
noticed.
very difficult over there. We're struggling with, because there is a little playground area over there as well, next to the concession area. And we're struggling with, how do you open up the playground area and keep the soccer fields closed?
Right.
And it's,
Maybe that's a function of fencing, maybe.
well, we were over there brainstorming and it's not as easy as one would think as far as just moving some fencing. But anyway, we are looking at developing some priorities over there.
Gotcha. Again, then looking down the edge here, of course, realize that when you're dealing with soccer fields and ball fields, putting trees out there is not what you want to do. We realize that, but there is an area here where I think where people like to have trees and that is at least in proximity to the field so they can get out under. If they have children there playing ball, it's nice to have trees that are out on the periphery of ball fields so people can get out under them. And this is a good area where that could be accomplished, so there's an opportunity here to do that. And as the play area you were talking about here, it's a nice little play area and it's got a nice feel to it as you come into it. It's close to concessions, close to parking, it's in the right location, and it's kind of got a nice feel to it as well. The backside, I took this because the backside of this is what kind of creates a bit of an eyesore when you're looking back at it. Some improvements could be suggested for how that better.
And that's also part of the current plan. They're working on some ideas. That billboard has been cleaned up as far as what the presentation is from the road.
And then coming back into the dog park transition here. Ron, I think the reason I took this picture and then coming down through here is that if this parking actually came down and came through the line here, you get a lot more spaces in.
So that area, outside of just maybe some suggestions right around the fencing area is probably gonna be out of the scope because the engineers are working on a design plan for a new storage facility, and it's gonna go back behind.
Back over here?
Right, it's gonna go back behind the dog park, and that
Oh,
would
it's gonna go,
basically become a roadway.
it's gonna come back here?
Yeah.
Okay, so
That
then
would
that's,
basically become an entrance, and the parking we'd have to redo the fencing on the soccer complex parking lot back there, because the parking for the dog park would have to move into that parking lot, the rear parking lot for the soccer complex.
so that's all in flux?
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's good to know. Yeah, looking through here, the dog park. Again, this is another result where sidewalks kind of break down. And when you're in a park, sidewalks ought to be as prominent and as important as a roadway, and that was one area where I saw the sidewalks that just kind of fall down a little bit. And it kind of takes away from getting somebody to walk into the park tends to fall down a little bit when they're dealing with that type of infrastructure. So I think some more thought put into the sidewalk system along the park would help it a lot. But from a landscape standpoint, I don't really think there's a whole lot you need to do with the soccer park. I mean, it is kind of what it is.
Yeah, unless
Oh,
we, on
my bad.
the fencing, as far as providing some shade trees, the fencing would probably have to be relocated, and you're gonna have a conflict of interest there. You know, do you want shade trees for the participants on the field, or do you want parking for all of the cars that flood over there? I've been here on the weekends, and there's cars everywhere. There must be 1,000 people out on the field, and they're everywhere. They're up on the banks, all over the no parking signs. So I'm not sure where they would rest their opinions on that.
Again, it's the way I look at it, it's for me to kind of look at it, assess it, and make the commentary
There
and then
is
in
a
turn
buffer
get the
area
feedback
in
and to
there.
listen.
Yeah, there is a buffer area in there on the fields because they set up their tents and everything. Everyone comes in and sets up their tents all along the perimeter of the field.
Okay. And just for you guys' edification, kind of, the purpose that I see of this coming in and concluding this first task is really for me to come in and look at it and giving you my opinion and what I see and the assessments that I make. But we're quickly coming into the period of time where it's up to me to listen. And I'm really trying to put the information out to generate the kind of feedback and then to start to listen. And once I listen and hear what everybody has to say, that converts into the design process and takes us into the next stage. And that's kind of looking into here. At this stage, what I'd be really looking for you guys would be is feedback on the information that I've presented in these last two meetings, and a list of priorities that you guys would feel as goals to be made as goals and objectives in this process. Those are really the most critical things that come out of that. And as I get that from you guys, I will certainly factor that into the work that we do at the next stage. And I don't know, has there been any traction made on creating that planning committee that we had talked about?
No.
I don't know, is that something, April, that we ought to consider as part of the public meetings, or I guess I'm looking kind of for direction of,
Well, I think.
if that doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. It's just suggesting that as a means of trying to get the information from the communities back to us.
Well, and I think probably, I know I've been swamped and I haven't done any of these things yet. So I think probably we're gonna have a little bit of lull at the beginning just so we can get organized and really figure out, how we need to work together and being very, very focused on, delivering our objective and our deadline of when we want to have that back by. Now, if I remember correctly, the project planning committee we wanted to try to vet to some of the HOAs.
Yes.
And see if we couldn't get.
Some
votes
participation
together.
from
Okay.
the HOAs, right? Again, it's the best way for, to get the information to them, and most importantly, is to get their feedback.
Okay.
Because, I've been in a scenario like this before where you go through working with your client and, with the initial groups, and then you come through conclusions, and then when you put it out to the public, sometimes they get outraged at how did you get so far with this, or why didn't you consider these things, and sometimes it blows up if you don't bring them along the way.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask Elle to reach out, an invitation, and I know, and I apologize that we discussed this last time, to send out an invitation to these folks to, attend our next meeting to see if we can get any volunteers to actually sign up on a roster
Mhm.
for a planning committee.
And whether it's a formal committee or not, or if it's just some people.
A work group, we like work groups.
Work group.
For stuff like this,
Yeah.
right? And that way they can get together, they can do their stuff without it having to fall into the public domain.
Because we would certainly want, when we do those public meetings, ideally is having those people there, but they've already been privy to some of the information that's being presented. And that helps, because then how people react to information is sometimes you just can't even gauge it. It just comes from all different directions. For good, bad, or indifferent, that's just usually how it is, especially in scenarios like this when you're dealing with people's community. I just suggest out of experience that you want to try to mitigate that as best you can.
Okay, and what
That's-
about the goals and the objectives?
I'm at our next, when we sit down, I'm gonna have mine. I'll probably even shoot you the ones that I had already listed. But it really is if there are any specific goals and objectives that you guys have that you could give to me that I can put in with the ones that I've been putting together. Whether you just wanna see my outline and comment on it, or give me information and have me put it in, it's 6 of one, half a dozen another to me. If you prefer that I just send out the list that I have and then get commentary and feedback on it, I'll do that as well. Whichever you think works better, April.
Do you guys
Sam?
have anything that you want them to add now?
Add in what way? Goals to me would be to try to keep something that, is, attractive yet low maintenance, you know, water-wise, xeriscape, well, not so much xeriscape, it's just more on the water-wise concept. I think you can get too carried away with the idea of xeriscape / native plants, where
Right.
water-wise gives you a little, larger palette to work with,
And
options.
I understand exactly the paradigm you're talking about there, JB, and they're kind of the same thing, but they're different ways of perceiving them.
Yeah,
They really are. To me, xeriscaping doesn't necessarily mean all native. It's
Exactly.
really, it's water usage
Yeah.
with plants. You're using the right plants that are
plant.
using the same water uses. And typically, you wanna use as many natives as you can because they have a better, you know, sustainability usually in local climates. But in some cases, as, you know, we all know, taking a native plant, putting it in a non-natural situation doesn't make it the best choice,
exactly.
just because it's native. But I think you're right there, and it's, in a lot of ways, it's the way you phrase those goals is as important as the goals themselves. You know, do we wanna have, increased pedestrian circulation and function as part of those goals? Does that wanna be in your roadway landscaping? To, you know, to the degree of what I talked about with, the soccer park, you've given me some insight, is there's some limitations there as to how deep we wanna go in the goals and objectives on the park themselves. I think I already got a better, the same feel you have for the common area park, that the primary goal for that would probably be that park in itself needs its own assessment. But we can start building some recommendations as part of this master planning process as to what we can do inside of the context of the park as it is today.
Okay, so I'll write down some goals and objectives for the pool and the sports complex, just to be sure that we don't lose focus there
Right.
and we don't, you know, utilize any precious time on
Right.
something that we have no intent of doing.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how this committee felt. You know, I've heard pros and cons about the number of oak trees that are in Gateway. Is the goal to maintain them, to increase them, to decrease them? You know, that's really a goal that I need some direction from you guys, because I think that would be a goal that we would have in the master plan.
Well,
Because we
that's-
really want to talk about the oaks because they are such a strong and dominant aspect of the landscape here. So they have to be part of the goals.
I agree with you. I think, you know, we wanna maintain the integrity of our current, oak culture / habitat, however you wanna phrase that. But at the same time, maybe, you know, add, some flavor.
I think that's what we had decided last time, is that one of our objectives would be to enhance the oak canopy that exists now. And that we wasn't going to necessarily create a plan where we were going to be eliminating oak trees.
Well, now you said enhance, so enhance from the aspect of adding more oaks?
Possibly.
Well,
Or-
Possibly.
Well, my concern there is when you read about the Texas oak blight and how it's slowly, you know, working its way south, where I don't think we want to, I mean, to me, we have enough oaks from the aspect of maybe we need to start working with a alternative
Right.
to start blending it in, so if you ever do get into this situation with the oak blight.
Like Dutch elm took
You
the
don't
trees
end up
out in
with
New
the
York.
Dutch elm situation.
Right.
So then you're saying an objective would be to find an alternative shade canopy.
To
that
me,
would
that's,
blend.
what you just stated is, you know, the goals is probably, that's probably one of the primary ones that I have in the list that I have already, is maintaining the integrity of the oak canopy and gateway.
Existing.
Yeah, now
Existing
maintaining is
But-
not removing any.
Right.
Okay.
Now, the
But
objective,
find an
that's one of the
alternative.
objectives, is bringing in diversity in that to
Diversity.
minimize the impact of potential blight. Yes, that's how you really start looking at,
Good word.
yeah.
So you're saying in the open areas where we talked about possibly putting in some shade canopy type trees to find an alternative other than an oak.
As opposed to adding more oaks.
Okay.
Black olives.
Black
gumbo
olives.
limbos.
Yep.
So that would be an
Yeah.
objective.
Gumbos is a bit of a
Geiger gets
reach
pretty
here,
cold
but-
out here, Geigers.
Yeah, I mean, gumbos and geigers are a bit of reach out here, but if you use them in small quantities, it wouldn't be problematic.
Well, I'm thinking too, with the canopy, the mature canopy that's already established, and then of course with the asphalt that's already here, and then the housing, that, you know, you may have a little bit of a microclimate where do those type of things in limited numbers, not massive numbers, but, you know, a Geiger for color, which is a native, slow growing. Just a, you know, kind of that one thing you talked about in, the commerce area, you know, you saw some areas where there was a potential for a splash.
Yep. I sense that's probably what the people the residents probably wanna see a little more splash in terms of the canopy. And really, that to me, JB, is really how you culminate coming out of this part, or this initial part of the process, is having the right goals and objectives that people get a feel for the direction that you're taking with the design, you know, with where you're taking that master plan. And that's really, to me, is the importance of getting that down right, so people understand the direction that you're going in.
Right. Kathleen had a good point about, you know, this is more of a hardscape issue, but maybe a long-term goal is to establish, you know, parallel sidewalks from the aspect of what you were saying about a loop. Even though it's just across the street, it's still a different feel.
It's a different feel.
Rather than up and back type of.
And it doesn't have to
what we're
be
doing
everywhere,
now.
it could
I
be
mean,
looped in certain areas, especially where you have a lot of residential. I mean, it really hit me today when I saw the bus unload and a bunch of kids walking up the side of the road, right on the opposite side of the street with the sidewalk. I mean, that right to me says, well, there's a bit of a conflict right
Yeah,
there.
good point.
Those are, you know, I lived here, that's my kid walking on the side of the road, not on the sidewalk.
Because part of this process, if we plan this right and we make our objectives, very focused, probably in this planning phase, we'd want to, realistically, we would probably have to budget, you know, the actual implementation in phases.
Right.
So I would think that if there's an area that we want to add the walking paths to, then we would landscape that in phase 2 or phase 3,
Mhm.
and let us try to get the actual walking paths installed somewhere in the first or second phase.
Yes.
So if we, you know, if we kinda have this overall visual of what we would like to see.
Correct. See, that
that's
really.
gonna- That's gonna help us with the budgeting and the planning for the implementation.
Because if something like that is in your goals and objectives, then those elements become part of your program. And then as you put that into your program and you create your master plan, then that becomes part of how you
Right.
phase it, how you budget
And
it,
then when someone
how
says,
you
well, how
implement
come you
it.
planted flowers over here, but you didn't plant anything over here? Well, without the
Because-
plan, and say, well, hey, we have a walking path scheduled for that area, you know, in the next few years, as soon
Correct.
as budget becomes available.
And that's really what your master plan does. It's your guiding element. Okay, well, I think I've chewed up a half hour more of your meeting than I anticipated, so. I think, if you have any other questions for me or anything, I'm here. Shoot me emails if there's any direction you wanna give. I'm open to that as well. But, the next stage will be for me to put my information together, meet with April and her team, and then come back to you guys for that conclusion of task 1.
Now, can I get clarification on what we wanna do for the survey of the signage? Is that just, what do you mean by survey exactly? Just where it's at?
Just basically, you'd have,
Or like a-
the
or
surveyor's just gonna,
evaluation?
surveyor's just gonna go out and he's gonna take his equipment and he's just gonna put where the walls are. It basically.
Okay, so literally a survey.
Just,
Okay.
and that's something that probably you could have a crew do. The main sign, the Griffin sign, and the Stony, they could probably do that in
I got
half.
some of them.
Probably, I'll probably take them a whole day to do all 4 of those. Actually, there's 5. There's 5 on the stuff. The other one would be the gateway wall at the
We
corner.
got Gateway Boulevard sign, Old Stony Brook sign, Daniels sign, and
Yeah.
Griffin and 82.
Yeah, the Daniels sign, it's down by the ball field, down by JetBlue. So there's 1, 2, 3, 6
Oh,
elements.
you got the Commerce Lakes, don't you, sign there too?
Those end cap ones I've already pretty much got.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Those were pretty easy to do. The ones that are a little more complex and scale, and those are a little more than we can do.
Okay.
And they're important enough elements that we need to get them right.
How about the West Link sign too?
Yep. All the end cap ones, we've already got those. We pretty much scaled those off and got those on our drawings, so we've taken care of those. It's the bigger ones that are just a little more important that they need to be surveyed. But they don't really, that doesn't come into critical play until we're in the design side of it. So, I mean, we're gonna need them soon, but they're not critical now. Okay, appreciate your time very much today. And any feedback you may have, I am wide open.
Just to reiterate and, correct me if I'm wrong, team. I think the goals we talked about was colorful xeriscaping, maintain the integrity of the current oak environment, and then add tree diversity, and then parallel sidewalks. Anything else? Yeah, it's a pretty good platter right there.
Mhm.
I think there ought to be some talk given to exploring that roundabout there because that is a major road that people haul.
I've got that noted to reach out to our DOT contact, because we're basically gonna have a partnership with Lee
Sure.
County on being the eyes, on maintaining these roadways and the pathways. Then we have compliance issues that we're gonna have to keep in check as well.
Yeah, I'm not saying we can do it, but we need to, I'd like to
So I'm gonna reach
explore.
out to the
Sure.
contact and just see how to open up a conversation about that. Maybe we request a traffic study, first, because it's getting 5 o'clock, that's a really bad intersection.
Mhm.
It is.
That is a challenging intersection, that's for sure.
All right, thank you, Bill.
You're welcome. I look forward to the follow-up to this one.
Thank you.
And I have it noted that we'll coordinate our next admin meeting.
Are you in tomorrow? I'll be in touch with you.
You have anything to say?
Yes.
Would you like to make any comments?
Yes,
Okay, great.
Okay.
I would like to update you about the two big issues that we are having lately. One is the weeds on the peanut bed. We did a treatment with Plato months ago and shocked a lot, very well, but some of the weeds is coming back. And Plato is, we can use just one application a year. So this week, we treated again with a mix and another, Basagran for a broadleaf weed and segment for the grassy weeds. These two combination, we can treat it, 3 times a year. And whatever they don't control, and then we are going to put it. So.
So you're using Bascran and what for the?
Segment
Sec,
for a grassy weeds.
okay.
And is this significantly down in the new medians?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as they grow in and get thicker, will the weeds?
The major issue that we
Become less?
have right
Thank
now
you.
is in torpedo grass. It's the major issue. We have a lot of torpedo grass growing in the bed. It's tough to control. Doesn't matter what kind of metal we use, chemical or cooling, it's really tough.
Okay.
And the other issue is the sockets on the oak trees. Previously, we have been using different things like a Roundup, like chemical to control the bruise. We approached to the University of Florida, and the only product that they recommend for this issue is Dicquat. So we started 3 months ago to use Dicquat. The major issue with Dicquat is a contact herbicide, so need to be applied more often, so we are treating as needed with Dicquat.
Oh, that looked better. I didn't see them
Yeah,
nearly as significant as they were for a while.
yeah.
A.E. Leonard, they're like a mail order horticultural company, are you familiar with them?
No.
Yeah, A.E. Leonard. But they had a sucker suppressant. We used it on crepe myrtles and had good luck on it. So, you might check with them
Okay.
and see if they still have that. And I don't remember, and I apologize, I don't remember the material, the active ingredient. There was some kind of growth retardant, I think, that, you know, when you would cut something, it just would keep it from coming back up. And you had to do it about, I think, every 6 months.
We have been using different products, but the University of Florida said that any kind of product is creating a stress for the plant. And thus the sucker is the reaction for the stress.
And that's what the tree trimming company said, that the more you stress it, the harder they grow.
Yeah, the harder they go. And then that's why they recommend just diclone, just kill the leaves and spray and spray.
Yeah.
But I will check it out to see if you have more success on that. Okay? Do you have any other question for me? I'll be happy to answer.
No, sir, I think that's great. Pardon?
Landscaping, you know what's going on with the Stony Brook landscaping? The landscaping of Gateway, the sign near Stony Brook,
Uh-huh.
Oh, A,
yeah,
okay.
is there anything being done? There's still no landscaping up there, I was told.
Like what?
No, they have a soil issue up there, and that was,
Yeah, I thought so.
the meeting prior to when Bill Prissy was here, began his dialogue, so that'd be 3 months ago. I know, y'all had discussed that, and then Ellie had sent us some pictures of that,
And I think they've even tested the soil, they've even,
and we really haven't,
Oh, you
given
said,
them any direction
The
or,
sign for the Stony Brook?
right,
Okay, yeah, I'm working on the proposal,
okay.
to redo the entire sign.
Okay.
to dig it all out,
Hmm?
to dig it all out and
Yeah.
replace the soil?
Yeah, I dig it out. It's basically, you have like 6 inches of soil, and after that, just clay. So that's why it's retains so many water, and that's why the plants die. So,
Okay.
it asked me to provide a proposal to remove
The clay.
2 feet of those clay and put a new soil.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that is the room that the bushes develop the most of the root system.
Are you putting, like gravel or rock in the bottom for drainage?
No, it's not part of the request, but I believe, she asked me, I say, well, if we put gravel, anyway, the clay is still down, still over down, it's nothing that they are going to do it. Now, if we make a hole in the wall and put a drain, and the clay will be work. But if we don't do the hole, on my opinion, to put gravel is not going to work. The only way to me that work is if we drill a hole in the wall, in that way the water can drain.
Do you have any idea how deep that clay is?
No, but I imagine it could be deeper because this is a hill that they built on.
Right.
So I can dig it out to see how deep it is.
Well, if you could maybe drill a hole and see, you know, just drill one hole and see how deep that goes, cause it may be, you know, your idea is kinda good rather than try to drill a hole through the wall, but if
What if there's only one more foot? Then
Well,
why
that's
don't-
what I'm
why don't
saying,
we-
then
Why
you-
don't we just dig out, right?
right, you put in a sump, so to speak, of, you know, you dig a
French
hole
drain.
and a French drain, right?
Right.
And then just to connect, you know, the good soil that you're gonna add
Mhm.
to the good soil beneath the clay, so you get the percolation.
So maybe before we make an investment, let's find out exactly,
How deep the clay is.
How deep it
If we
is.
can drill that.
is that something that you can do, or
Yeah, I
do we
can-
need, actually like a boring sample?
No, it's easy to dig it
You
out.
can get that?
It's easy to dig it out.
Okay.
I can dig it out. How deep do you want, like 4 feet?
4 feet from where you are now, to
From
see how
ground
deep?
level?
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you just took a post hole digger or something, try to figure out how deep that clay goes. I mean, if it is more than 4 feet, then we gotta look at other alternatives.
Okay, I will do that and I'm going to report because me as a mainscape, the customer trusts on us, and then I wanted to do the final solution.
Sure.
I don't want it to do some Band-Aid solution. I going
No.
to find a solution. So.
Well, and we
that's
need a
why
long-term solution if we're ultimately gonna, you know,
Right.
possibly redo these signs, I mean, so we need a long-term solution.
I think we're all in agreement there.
Okay.
So let's just try to figure out the depth of that, and if it's not, if it's 4 foot or less, I think we've got a good alternative.
Okay. Yeah. I will dig it out, take a picture and send a report to all of you. And you give me direction what to do.
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds good?
Yes?
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
Thank you,
You
Tony, you
too.
too.
Okay, do we wanna move forward with the, all these items, or do we wanna set a time limit on these items, or how does everybody's schedule look? Or is everybody
Go
all?
through them in like 10 minutes.
Can,
has a plan?
are there a couple that I can answer?
Sure, that'd be great.
Follow up on the FPNO easement.
Yep.
WCI has no intention of building a gate on the Gateway Boulevard side.
Not even a rope like they had before?
So, because of that, I don't know what's going on with the rope. I assume that there was just like a cable across the walking path.
Yes.
We're gonna go out and fix that.
Thank you.
Because they've also suggested we internally, our facility inspector, recommended that we put some decals on the new gates that are out there, reflectors. And this cable out here is just a constant battle, and it's probably our residents, and it's definitely our residents that complain about this, and it's really, really inconsequential just to have some cable on board and just go out there and run the cable, when it needs to be fixed. So we're gonna handle that internally, but they do not intend to put up a gate there.
Okay, very good.
What else is on here for me?
Go ahead, Kevin.
No, I forgot about the allocation of 21 grand, that was just transferring money back and forth to different accounts, right? E? Does that to go to the perennial trees?
I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly what that was about, the 21,000.
It's been a while ago, so I can't remember.
Allocation
what
of
it is.
funds.
That was when you were gonna take the money to replant, some of the replanting.
Okay, well, the replanting, there was a proposal prepared, and, it was a lot. I'm thinking it was 40+ grand. So I'm like, okay, well, clearly we need to prioritize some things on there, and we kinda need to pick and choose. And now the fiscal year end is on us, so I need to reach out to ST and figure out if they roll over some of those capital dollars. I don't know how that works with the new budget. So let me reach out to them. This was allocation for replanting.
And that relates to D then, correct, April?
Yeah.
That's
Update
what
on
it is.
replants regarding gaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have this huge proposal from Mainscape, and for various reasons, it took a while to get that. So we're gonna have to regroup on that for New Year.
Okay, well, we can,
And I think probably what we need to do is bring that to the next meeting, and perhaps maybe just internally, we can make some suggestions. So if you want to scout around and maybe see where we might need some crucial replanting and have an idea for the next meeting, and I can put Ella on notice for that as well.
review
Did-
location.
Did Ellie already have a idea where she wanted them?
I thought you did.
Would have had to have something to get a price from those guys.
I think they just went out and did it from an inventory perspective.
Is that some document that she can send us
Uh-huh,
as a
yeah.
starting point?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we're just rolling right down the list.
Okay, was that everything for me?
Contract addendum regarding number of mows?
We have not done anything with the Mainscape contract. the longer that I'm here, the more I see additional issues that need to kind of be addressed. So we've not done anything. And this was the additional mows on the easement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
FPL.
Strangely enough, certain feedback that I got from residents, the suggestion was actually a lower number than is currently in the contract. So.
What number's in the contract?
32? Seems like it's.
No, I
maybe
thought it was
it's
closer
30.
to 40.
Maybe
It
the
was-
suggestion
To me, it was
was
kind
the
of
32.
ridiculous.
No, what they wanted to go to was like 40.
Oh, is that what they wanted?
48.
Yeah.
Oh, no, yeah, that's like nuts.
Yeah, no, those aren't that's not
It's
the
probably
number
39.
that I had got, so that just kinda got switched to the back burner because they have been mowing, keeping up with it better since we've been doing our routine meetings with them. And so they have been, I think, getting better at managing some of the hot topic issues.
Okay. When is the, you were still looking at some point, and that probably is down the road now, but you were looking at, re-looking at that contract to make sure that the scope made sense based on what was being done, is that?
Are we talking about, which are we
Well,
talking about?
just the general proposal.
From Mainscape?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we were trying to address. I just kind of need to review the contract in detail. And it really just takes time for me
Yeah,
to
sure.
listen to staff and understand exactly what our expectations are, and then read through the document and see if that's actually
Gotcha.
in the contract.
Do you know when that contract renews or whatever?
I do not.
Okay.
I'm gonna note it on here.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I think we're pretty,
That's okay.
That's being done.
yeah, it looks like that's being corrected.
What is the warranty on relocation of Cocoa Plums?
We were supposed to tell them if we wanted to spend the $2,000 to move them in.
Oh,
Right.
this was the median thing. Okay.
Yeah. Wasn't that what that was? Or was that missing Cocoa Plums?
No, they
And I think that was to
replaced-
move it off of the road.
Yeah, just to move it off the sidewalk, they wanted it.
That was the
Not
proposal.
smart enough to
Well,
use
that's
common
J.
sense when
That's
they
J,
landscape.
That's
yeah.
J. H was they had to replace some, and they did all that, so that's done. J was the proposal of moving them in, I think, is what.
That's what was the proposal.
Oh, you're right.
And did we never gave our opinion on that, cause it got tabled. If we thought if the board should spend the $2,100 or not.
Yeah, I mean, philosophically and theoretically, yeah, but reality, I don't think it's worth it,
I agree.
I think that's what you had said before.
so.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Covered well.
And,
So do we feel comfortable, paying the remainder of that contract? Are we happy with what they've done out there? They relocated the one tree, I believe?
I don't know, I didn't go look.
You say they did? I couldn't tell, I wasn't looking at the trees, I was.
Yeah, they did
looking at-
relocate it.
Okay.
Yeah, the one that was next to the irrigation?
Right, they reclaimed,
Okay.
because I could see the bare spot where it was.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Peanut grass.
Did anybody palm, or pine straw there or anything?
They didn't put anything there. It's just a plain, well, it was when I looked, just a plain dirt spot. I don't know, maybe it didn't grow in, okay? That's why. I
Yeah,
had
they
to
were gonna
relook it.
they were gonna move that tree and expand that, Azora hedge down
Right.
a couple.
I don't know if they did that, I didn't.
I guess we need to look at that.
Okay,
I mean, you guys, if you feel that they've done it, you could, I don't have a problem paying it.
I mean, I think it looks good.
okay, so
Everything
just,
is-
I didn't look at it.
check for a check the Exoras by the tree that they moved? Because they were supposed to expand that.
There were supposed to be one or two in there,
I
Yeah.
think one or
Yeah.
two, yeah,
just because there was a big gap. Once they moved the tree down, there's gonna be a gap.
right.
Okay, so.
So one more Azora and move the pine straw over. That's about it, you get her done.
Yeah. Well,
And then
you
we're
know,
okay?
You can always, where they moved the tree had pine straw, so.
Well, it appears that they didn't do that from what.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
Well, that's what I'm saying, you know, if they get it, what's it gonna cost you, I mean, like, get in one of those little pissing contests.
Right.
It's like, well, what happened to the straw where you put it in the tree?
Good.
It's like dealing with kids.
Couldn't afford a third of a bale straw.
Go ahead, Catherine.
I
Okay,
have
so-
one more question.
Yes?
Okay, when you're going down Gateway towards the north entrance, there's survey stakes. Do you know what the survey stakes are for?
North entrance.
That's 82, right?
Correct.
Yeah, they're survey stakes
Gateway Boulevard?
on Gateway Boulevard. As you go down, there are, they look like survey stakes. They have stakes in the ground with a little flag on the top.
They might have just been from like the as-built surveys that we were doing. That was the last thing that we were doing is on our segment of the road. Is that our segment? That's our segment of the road down there,
Yeah.
I believe. We had to get our surveys done for the road turnover, so I would imagine it's the survey stakes from that.
So that's what I can tell them. Okay, thank you.
Not to, we kinda skipped that fungicide treatment on the palms, on those, thatch palms, but we'll have to have them tell us about that.
So-
Yeah, we can just table that for next meeting.
Yep.
And,
Table the candidate for next meeting.
yep. So, any new business? Alright,
Okay, next.
next meeting, October 25th, 4 PM.
A motion to adjourn?
Yep, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Alright, all in favor?
Aye.
Massive crowd scream.
Did we hear,
Jimmy.